Ezra chapter 2 is a story of returning exiles. And we don't have a name of each returning exile. We have names of some of them. But some of them we just have the family group that they came from or the cities that they came from. It shows what happened when God moved in the hearts of people. We often hear of the Babylonian captivity of the children of Israel. In many ways, it was more of an exile than a captivity. They were they were allowed a large amount of freedom and even prosperity. See, some people would have been happy to just stay there because things were good. In fact, some people did stay there. In fact, was a large Jewish population there years later when Queen Esther had to step in to save them from being executed. The events that are happening now were before the events of Queen Esther. So just put that into perspective. There were people that stayed behind that did not return. What we're looking at is the people that initially returned to resettle that land. To return to Israel was to return to a land that was run down and needed to be rebuilt. In other words, it would have took a lot of sacrifice to return to that land. It would have been much more comfortable to just stay in Babylon, where there was stability, where there was a good economy, where there was opportunity to be prosperous, versus going back to Jerusalem and the surrounding cities where everything was a mess and had to be rebuilt. Still, many did return because God moved in their lives. We saw that last week. God was moving in the life of King Cyrus. He was moving in the lives of so many others. Let this challenge us that when God moves us to action, we should listen and follow him. Let's also make sure that we're doing things for the right reasons, not just to get something for ourselves. We're going to actually look at something that could have been a bit of a motivator, especially for the priests, and see how easy that could be a distraction from really doing what God wants you to do. Let's bow for a word of prayer. Dear Lord, guide us as we look at this passage. I pray that we're challenged to follow your leading, but also to follow you for the right reasons, and to not just get caught up in our own selfish desires, Lord. Help us to do your will, to seek your will, and to desire it for your glory. In Jesus' name, amen. The Jewish people have been exiles in Babylon, and now they get a chance to return to their homeland. Let's not forget that this was their promised land, a land that had been promised to them by God. But there's something else. It was also a land that would help point them to the promised Messiah. Remember when we were in the book of Zechariah, which also occurs around this time? He kept emphasizing that this promised branch would come. And we saw from the book of Jeremiah, remember, Jeremiah was writing as the captives were being led off to Babylon. And he was saying, you're going to have a king. This branch is going to be a king. And he's going to be God, your righteousness. God himself is going to be your king. Well, in order for them to have a king, they need to be in the nation that was promised to them by God. So in order to have the king, they need to come back to the nation that God had promised them, the nation of Israel, with the capital itself being Jerusalem. So you need to go back to this nation, to rebuild this nation, to rebuild this capital, so that the king can come. I want you to get a picture of the significance of all of this to the idea of Jesus coming. Jesus coming as king, Jesus coming as Messiah. So it's very important for them to come back, not just for their own heritage, but for the promises of God that involve Jesus Christ himself. You see, this land would help point them to the promised Messiah. a land that would bring us all to Jesus. It was important for them to return so Jesus could come as their king. God uses the returning exiles to accomplish his purposes. Let's not forget that temple being rebuilt is a key part of it. And that temple is being rebuilt so Jesus can minister by going into the temple, by being in the temple. Look at verses 1 and 2 of Ezra chapter 2. Now these are the people of the province who came out of the captivity of the exiles, whom Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon, had carried away to Babylon, and returned to Jerusalem and Judea, each to his city. These came with Zerubbabel, Jeshua, Nehemiah, Sariah, Reliah, Mordecai, Bilshan, Mizpar, Bigvia, Rehum, and Baanah, the number of men of the people of Israel. I don't know who Bigvia and Rehum are, but Baanah. Some of those names aren't familiar, but some of them are. From the book of Haggai, the book of Zechariah, you probably recognize names Zerubbabel and Jeshua. That sounds a lot like Joshua. By the way, it's the same Hebrew word. So our translators, the translators that translated Ezra versus the translators that translated Zechariah, understand a lot of our translation comes from the King James. They did a lot of really good work. And there was a huge team of translators that worked on that work. And some of them would take on one book, another would take on another book. Well, understand, they're translating and they're trying to transliterate some of these names. This really makes me feel a lot better about reading these names today. And I mispronounced some of them. The translators, some of them translated Joshua, some of them translated Jeshua. So the translators that worked on Ezra versus the ones that worked in Zechariah, some call it Jeshua, some call it Joshua. So if I mispronounce some names as I read this morning, I'm not going to feel terrible bad about it because people way smarter than I am couldn't agree on exactly how to pronounce some of these names. I hope that encourages you too as you try to pronounce some of these names. And what really helped me is when there were so many more audio resources compared to what there used to be. I mean, just from now compared to 20 years ago even, we have so much more available to us. And I'm able to listen to so many different preachers on audio and scholars talking and commenting on different passages. And hearing them pronounce these names different, I'm like, I guess I don't have to get it perfect. But anyway, Joshua is that high priest Joshua that we read about earlier, Zechariah and Haggai. And Zerubbabel is the governor. You might also recognize the name Nehemiah. If you know your Old Testament books, you know that the book of Nehemiah comes right after the book of Ezra. So that brings us some questions about Nehemiah. Nehemiah was the guy that returned to Jerusalem to rebuild the wall. Long after Ezra had been there to get the work going for the temple. In fact, by the way, Ezra isn't even there yet as we're reading this. Ezra comes later. There'll be later chapters in the book of Ezra. He'll tell when he comes. But Ezra isn't even there yet. But he's just got the account of the people that went. Nehemiah is going to come decades later. So the question is, did Nehemiah initially come and then go back and then get sent later to return again? Or is it a different Nehemiah? I don't know. Evidence seems to suggest it's a different Nehemiah. I'm kind of leaning that direction, but I'm not dogmatic. If you want to study it yourself, go ahead. The other interesting figure is Mordecai. That's the same name as Esther's cousin or uncle. depending on which translation you have. Some say it's her cousin, some say it's her uncle. There again, that takes place years later. Did Mordecai go and then be a really, really old man by the time Esther takes place? And he had returned back to Babylon after having gone to Jerusalem? There again, we don't know. It's also possible that it was a real common name. Because as we read through that list of names, we saw a name that says, oh, and the other guy had that same name. You heard that, read through that. So we don't know that this Nehemiah and this Mordecai are the same ones. They would have had to have been really old men for it to be possible, but it might be. So just take that for what it's worth. It's not something that's critical to our understanding of the passage. It's a little bit of trivia because these are somewhat familiar names, and it helps you to just look at it. What I want you to do is I want you to start asking questions. I want you to realize this Bible is interesting. These names are interesting, and these names aren't mistakes. And start asking the questions to try to figure out clues. If you don't find all the answers in this lifetime, that's okay. But don't be afraid to ask questions. It makes a scripture that much more interesting because all of a sudden you find possibilities. And it'll give you an excuse to dig into the scripture. It's kind of like trying to solve a puzzle. Some of you probably like crosswords or Sudoku. Well, start doing a deep dive on Mordecai and Nehemiah. It's just kind of fun. So I'll leave it at that. Regardless, there are over 42,000 people who will come. And verses 2 through 20 lists thousands of people from different family groups. Then we get to verses 21 through 35. Verses 21 through 35. And it lists people whose families were from different cities in Judah. In many ways, this chapter is a detailed census of the return, giving some names and just giving numbers. And so there's some interesting trivia, some interesting puzzles to start solving as you look at that as well. Notice that verse 1 told us the people did not just return to Jerusalem, but other towns as well. So when you look at that list of towns, verses 21 through 35, that makes sense. But something that really stands out is that a large percentage of those who return are from priestly families. This would make sense when you realize that those families have a large part in the temple, and their identity actually revolves around the temple and the temple worship. You see, their job was to serve in the temple as priests. So they would be motivated to go back to rebuild the temple. So that's really what their lives and their heritage is about. Imagine if you come from a heritage of farmers and you're living in a land where there's no farmland. And your family has the heritage of being farmers, and you have an opportunity to return to a land where your family had farmed for generations. There would be a motivation there. And for the priests, the motivation to return to the place where their family is served. We're going to see something similar with Solomon's servants. You could see why some of these people would want to go and why the priests would especially want to go. But the Levites had also served. Some of them served in the temple, but a lot of them served in other cities surrounding Jerusalem. And the Levites aren't quite as motivated as the priests. We're going to look at that in a bit. I think we'll understand why as we look at the dynamics that are going on here. But let's jump ahead to verse 36. I'm not going to read through in detail every name, but we'll jump ahead to verse 36 because we're going to talk about these priests. It says the priests, the sons of Jehoiada of the house of Jeshua, 973. The sons of Immer, 1,052. The sons of Pashur, 1,247. The sons of Hiram, 1,017. So this is listing these different family groups these priests are from. Now, all the priests were from the tribe of Levi, but they had to also be descendants of Aaron within the tribe of Levi in order to be a priest. So all priests were Levites, but not all Levites could be priests, because there were some people from the tribe of Levi that weren't descended from Aaron. So they had other jobs other than being priests. They still had important jobs. And some of them had jobs in the temple, others had jobs in cities surrounding Jerusalem. There were special Levitical cities, they called them, that were set up for places of refuge and for the Levites to serve in. And the Levites did have a job of being servants to point people to the Lord, but it wasn't the same as what the priests had. In many respects, the Levites had more of the grunt work. That might be part of the reason, but not all of it was necessarily grunt work. Some of the Levites had the job of being singers. Now, we typically don't think of that as grunt work. You think of being a janitor as grunt work, but you don't think of singers being grunt work. So some of them were janitors, some were singers. There's a number of different jobs they had. But only those who descended from Aaron could serve as priests in the temple, and with that service came some extra privileges. For example, the priests got a portion of some of the best meat that was brought for the offerings. Now, the offerings that were brought, there was like 10% that went towards the Levites as well. But the priests got the best of the best. And after the priests got it, then the Levites got it. So, yes, the Levites did get a benefit from the offerings that were brought, but the priests got more of the benefit. One of the theories is that's why there were more priests that signed up. Stop and think about it. If we had a work day here at church and you knew Brady was bringing desserts, you might be motivated to come. But if you knew Gerard was going to show up and he was going to grill steaks, you'd be even more motivated to show up if you knew he was going to grill steaks, wouldn't you? Oh, a lot of people. Mick's grinning already. He's ready to come. That's kind of one of the theories why they figure the priests, I should step away from the pulpit here again because it's a theory. But that's one of the theories why there were so many priests signed up. And there's something later in this passage that seems to support that. Why there were so many priests signed up, because they're going to get the best of the meat. And yeah, it's pretty comfortable staying back in Babylon. But think of all those T-bone steaks. Well, maybe we should go. You see how that reasoning can start to kick in? I just want to put that out as a caution. Serve the Lord, but be careful that you're not just serving Him only out of selfish motivation. Having said that, sometimes when you serve the Lord, you do get a treat. I've been to church work days where the ladies have bought food, and wow, what a blessing. Don't shun the blessings, but don't let the blessings be your main motivation. So we have these priests, we have these offerings, and we have way more priests signing up to come than we have Levites signing up to come, even though it makes sense to believe there would be way more Levites than there are priests, because only those that were descendants from Aaron can be priests. So it doesn't make sense that there would be more priests than there are total Levites, but there are way more priests signed up to go to Jerusalem than there are Levites that sign up. So verses 40 through 43. The Levites, the sons of Jeshua and Kadmiel, the sons of Hodaviah, the singers, the sons of Asaph. Notice there, these are among the Levites. The singers, the sons of Asaph, they were Levites. 128 singers sign up to go. The sons of the gatekeepers, the sons of Shallum, the sons of Ater. So evidently Shallum and Ater were gatekeepers. The sons of Talmon as well, the sons of Akab, the sons of Hatai, the sons of Shiboah. So all these people that were gatekeepers, 100 and in all 139. So 139 of their sons sign up to go. So their job as Levites in this example is gatekeepers. The temple servants, the sons of Zehoah, the sons of Hasupha, the sons of Tabath, and it lists a bunch of those. We continue on into verses 44 and following, and we get even more details. The Levites would serve in many support roles around the temple, but they were not priests. This list gives us some examples of what they might do in that support role. Verse 41 shows singers. Verse 42 shows gatekeepers. Verse 43 shows temple servants. This could be janitors or any other jobs the priest had to do. They had to bring wood, or any other job the priest gave them to do. So a lot of these Levites would have to get the wood for the sacrifices, maybe clean out the ashes, carry them away. If we kept reading after verse 33 until the end of verse 54, over 10 verses there, we find a list of many Levite families who were temple servants. So there's a long list there, but still doesn't add up to the total of priests. Priests and Levitical servants would be important as they rebuilt the temple, and also as they did sacrifices on the altar before the temple was to be rebuilt. There was a lot of work for them to do. But there's another group that steps in to return. It's another special category of servants. And it could have a connection to heritage as well. Look at verses 55 to 58. It says, the sons of Solomon's servants, the sons of Satai, the sons of Hasbarath, the sons of Peruda, the sons of Jalah, the sons of Darkon, the sons of Giddel, the sons of Shephatiah, the sons of Hatil, the sons of Patrath Hasbarim, the sons of Ami, all the temple servants and the sons of Solomon's servants were 392. So temple servants and Solomon's servants added together are still only 392. But of that total, some were Solomon's servants. Now, Solomon was not of the tribe of Levi. Solomon was of the tribe of Judah. So we have to ask, who were Solomon's servants? Some suggest that they were descendants of Gentile families that had worked for Solomon as his servants. In fact, one theory is that they were prisoners of war. Perhaps David had captured them as prisoners of war, and then Solomon had inherited them when he became king, and he put them to work building the temple. But the indication is that they had stuck around, and they had become part of this Jewish community. So even if they were Gentile servants, they become part of this Jewish community. And the theory is that they had actually converted to become proselytes. In other words, they had followed the God of Israel, just like so many others had. Think of Ruth. She was a Gentile who converted to follow the God of Israel. So we have these servants of Solomon, and one of the theories is that they were just servants, even Gentiles, who later converted and were committed to seeing the temple rebuilt. Because guess what? Their forefathers who worked on it. And so they had a family heritage of having rebuilt it. And they wanted to identify with the God of Israel. And they says, yeah, we want to come along too. If their forefathers had worked in the first temple and now they get to rebuild it, that would be quite the heritage of a family. Think of the heritage of Solomon's family. He was of the family of David. David's family points to the Messiah, Jesus Christ. Solomon's servants, their families point to the temple. That's part of their heritage. For David, his heritage is the Messiah. For Solomon's servants, their heritage is the temple itself. So you can see why they want to come. This is showing us that God is using so many different people from so many different backgrounds. God can use anyone, even you. But make sure you are serving for the right reasons. I challenged you with that earlier. I hope you're not serving the Lord just for the free food. You see, not just anyone could do whatever they wanted to do. Certain families with certain heritage had the right to be priests. In fact, certain families with certain heritages had the right to be in the line of David to be king. This is all important for us to grasp, that there are certain families with certain heritages that had a right to something. And we might say, well, that's not fair. Whether it's fair or not in our minds, because we don't have royalty in this country, so it's hard for us to even think about royalty, or to think that certain family groups would have privileges, because that kind of goes against so much of what we look at as equity. And by the way, what we look at as equity isn't necessarily wrong to be looking at it that way. I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is God set things up for a specific reason without equity in certain aspects in order to paint a picture. So why would he have that inequity within the Levites to say that only certain ones could be priests? For the same reason that he wanted to establish that only certain people from the line of David could be the Messiah. Because what did that do? It pointed us to Jesus. So we come to this issue of only certain people being allowed to be priests. And all of a sudden we have this question about some of these people who say, hey, I want to go and be a priest. I want to return to be a priest. And the question comes up, are you really of that family line to be a priest? Because you can't prove it. You can't prove that you're from that family line. So they essentially said, you're going to be standing off to the side until we can determine whether you're really from that family line. And they had to consult with the high priest, who consulted with the Urim and the Thummim, which we talked about earlier, which was likely a couple stones that they would reach into a bag and draw one stone out, would be yes. If they drew the other stone, would be no. Like I said earlier in the introduction, some people believed that it was two stones that lit up, one yes, one no. Regardless of how it worked, they had to consult with that. Because the question is, are these people really from the priestly line? So now let's go back to, how does this relate to Jesus? Is Jesus really from the line of David? Because Jesus didn't have to be from the priestly line, the Levitical line. He had to be from the line of David. And you look at the genealogies, one in Luke, one in Matthew, one genealogy for Mary, one genealogy for Joseph. Both those genealogies show these of the line of David. A son of David. A king descended from David. One line goes through Nathan, the other line goes through Solomon. One side on the mother, one side on the father. Shows that Jesus has all the genealogical support to be king. So they didn't have to consult with the Urim and the Thummim. He had that support. But these priests didn't have the support that Jesus has. So they had to say, well, wait a minute. We're not going to let them just serve as priests. So that brings us to verses 59 through 63. Now these are those who came up from Telmia, Tel Arsha, Cherith, Adon, Immer, but they were not able to give evidence of their fathers' households. In other words, they weren't able to give their genealogies, the full genealogies. They were not able to give evidence of their fathers' households and their descendants. whether they were of Israel. So people are even saying, these might even be Gentiles. We don't know. They were taken captive along with others, but were they really priests, let alone Israelites? Verse 60 says, the sons of Deliah, the sons of Tobiah, the sons of Nekoda, and the sons of the priests, the sons of Habiah, the sons of Hakaz, the sons of Barzillai, who took a wife from the daughters of Barzillai the Gileadite, and he was called by their name. They searched among their ancestral registration, but they could not be located. Therefore, they were considered unclean and excluded from the priesthoods. They weren't allowed to serve as priests. And the governor said to them that they should not eat of the most holy things until a priest stood up with Urim and Thummim. So they couldn't eat of the most holy things, that special meat the priest got, the best cuts of meat, they couldn't eat of them until the priest stood with the Urim and Thummim. In other words, the priest had to consult with God to say, yes or no, are these guys really priests? Notice it says there's a connection to the Gileadites. The land of Gilead was the land across the Jordan River. Remember the tribe of Reuben, the half tribe, or the tribe of Reuben, the tribe of Gad, the half tribe of Manasseh are the ones that lived over there. And they were sometimes almost forgotten about because they were on the other side of the Jordan. It was the far reaches of the land of Israel. And these people had a connection to that land. And so the question is, that was in the far reaches of Israel. Are we sure they're even Israelites and that they're not Gentiles? So they had to consult. They had to make sure. That's what's going on here. And notice it says they couldn't eat of the best meat until they found out. That was probably one of the motivations why they wanted to go as priests, because they would get the best meat. And they're saying, hold on, we got to make sure. But regardless, we have over 42,000 people returning. Look at verses 64 through 67. The whole assembly numbered 42,360, besides their male and female servants, who numbered 7,337. And they had 200 singing men and women. Their horses were 736. Their mules, 245. Their camels, 435. Their donkeys, 6,720. Not only did a lot of people go back, not only was there a lot of livestock, but those who were prosperous shared a lot of their resources, including silver and gold. Look at verses 68 and 69. It says that some of the heads of the fathers' households, when they arrived at the house of the Lord, which is in Jerusalem, offered willingly for the house of God to restore it on its foundation. Notice they're offered willingly to give money towards the house of God to get it back on its foundation. Now here's what's really neat. I'm going to just pause here. So we're going to find out later that King Cyrus actually gave a grant. He says, I'm going to fund this. I'm going to give the money for the resources to fund this. But knowing that there was a grant from the government of Persia to rebuild the temple, we still have these people saying, we're going to give money so this temple can be rebuilt. Now there's a question if some of that money was given to just help with travel expenses so that people could go there to rebuild the temple, or if they were giving all this gold and silver to actually buy resources for building the temple. We're not absolutely solidly certain on all of those things, but the numbers are astounding. Look at verse 69. According to their ability, they gave to the treasury of the work 61,000 gold drachmas and 5,000 silver minas and 100 priestly garments. Now, the value of gold and silver in today's dollars If we were to do the calculations based on what they figured drachma weighed, what they figured the silver weighed, brace yourself. We're talking well over $70 million worth of gold and silver. $70 million. These are actually, understand, 42,000 people going. That's still a little under $1,700 a piece. But the fact that they raised $70 million worth of gold and silver, or roughly that, from exiles, that's astounding. This is what happens when God moves people to accomplish his purposes. In Ezra 1:5, it says, the heads of fathers' households of Judah and Benjamin, and the priests and the Levites rose, even everyone whose spirit God had stirred to go rebuild the house of the Lord, which is in Jerusalem. God's stirring people, and things are getting accomplished. By the way, going back to Ezra 1:5, it says, of the households of Judah and Benjamin. Here's another little piece of trivia and another little puzzle piece. Why do you think he listed Judah and Benjamin? Judah was the tribe of David, the tribe of their king. So then why Benjamin? Well, Benjamin and Judah, there are a lot of people from Benjamin that were taken captive, but I think there's also another reason. Benjamin was the tribe of their other king. Remember before David, it was King Saul. King Saul was David's father-in-law. David served under King Saul before King Saul was taken out of the picture and then David ruled. King Saul was of the tribe of Benjamin. So the two tribes that had kings, Judah and Benjamin, they're stepping forward. They were people in leadership positions. They were people that had a heritage, kind of like the Levites and the priests had a heritage. The people from Benjamin and Judah had a royal heritage. They're the royal families in Israel, and they're stepping up. And look what happens when these prominent families who have valuables step up. $70 million roughly. There again, this is an estimate. But look at all that is raised. It is exciting to see what can happen when God stirs hearts. But there's also a warning. The hearts were stirred to go rebuild. Funds were raised. And then we get to the book of Haggai. And what does Haggai have to do? He has to tell them, get busy and rebuild that temple. It sat for 15, 16 years after they laid the foundation. And what were they doing? Instead of rebuilding the temple, they were putting wainscoting on the walls of their houses and making their houses fancy. $70 million is spent, and they're making their houses fancy instead of the temple. Is that really what those heads of the households want that $70 million to be used for? You see why Haggai was a little bit upset and was scolding them over that? More and more pieces of this puzzle coming together and realizing what's going on here. Then look at the ending of Ezra chapter 2, verse 70. Now the priests and the Levites and some of the people, the singers, the gatekeepers, and the temple servants lived in their cities, and all Israel in their cities. So notice that not everybody goes right back to Jerusalem. They're going back to their cities. This also helps to explain why the work in Jerusalem of rebuilding the temple kind of got pushed to the side. Because there's a lot of stuff going on here. These cities need to be built. Jerusalem itself needs to be rebuilt. The people that are settling in Bethlehem and the other cities around there need to fix up those towns. And it's easy to forget about the temple. God stirred their hearts to get them to go back. And he's not going to let them forget about the temple. He's going to bring guys like Haggai and Zechariah say, get to work. Get going in that temple again. But there's so many things that can distract us. Wanting to put wainscoting on our own walls. Wanting to get the steak suppers and having that motivate us. But to realize God's providing these resources. God's providing the people. God's providing the finances. Put your focus on God and trust Him. He stirred your heart to go. Don't back off. That should have been the message for these people. But you know what? Those people aren't here for me to talk to today. You are. When God stirs your heart to do something, trust Him. And do it whether you get a reward for it or not. Trust Him. Serve Him faithfully, knowing He can provide what's needed to accomplish what He wants to get done. And if He's able to use you to do it, whether you're just a temple singer, whether you're just a gatekeeper, or whether you're just one of the other people that just went along to go along, be there to support the work of the Lord and be faithful. Follow the Lord and know He'll provide the resources. I'm going to give you time to reflect in prayer. Ask the Lord to use you for His glory. After you've had just a few moments to reflect, Beck, I'll ask you to close us up with prayer.